Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome, bookworms and first-time viewers, to the Books by Adrian author platform and our flagship show, Livestream Sunday. If you are new, my name is Adrian Santiago. Hello, welcome. And I'll be your host today and every Sunday. We have 13 more episodes after this one for season 3. And I am so very pleased that you guys are here for episode 3, where we're going to talk to the fantastic Alex Wolff. Before we do that, a couple of quick things to get out of the way. The chat is now subscribers only. So if you are not yet subscribed and you want to participate in the chat, just hit that subscribe button. You will immediately be allowed to participate in the chat. That is particularly cool because you can ask questions to our awesome guest. What else do we have here? Oh, yeah. So we are streaming simultaneously now on both YouTube and Facebook. If you are watching on Facebook, welcome. You can chat with us live through Facebook as well. But please take a moment to visit the YouTube stream itself and leave a like on it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications. Doing these things helps the channel to reach more people, and it helps us to grow on YouTube. While you're at it, at some point, drop a comment down below telling us what your favorite part of the interview was, or if you have any follow-up questions for our guests that we didn't get to in the episode, you can leave them in the comments, and we can get back to those later on. Lastly, the show will be a bit more structured than it was in previous seasons. So today's episode will feature 3 short segments, all totaling up to a 1-hour runtime. We'll take some questions from the chat in the third part. And so please delineate any questions with the big letter Q so that we can spot them from a mile away and share them with our guest at the third part of our show today. Okay, so I think that takes care of the business. Let's talk a little bit about Alex Wolff before we bring her out here. So my guest today is the powerful Alex Wolff, based in England. Ms. Wolff is the author of fantasy novels Vatican and Elan, Son of Song, which was released on August 20th. So it's only been out for a couple of weeks, and she's probably riding high on that release. So we're going to talk to her about that. She's also published under the name of Lucy Parfit. I might be mispronouncing that last name. We'll ask her. And with a book titled Jilted Recovery in 2020, in which she shared a true and authentic account of recovery from the harshest breakups in the most complicated years of our history. And boy, was it ever. So the first chapter is available for free on alexwolfonline.com. All her links are down below in the description. And let's go ahead and welcome Miss Wolff together. Let's get some snaps in the chat, y'all. All right, Miss Wolff, welcome. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good.
Everyone, we were just talking before we went live that this is, I believe, Miss Wolff's first time on a live stream or an interview like this of any sort. So she's definitely a little giggly over there. I can tell she's feeling a little nervous. It's all right. Everybody make her feel welcome. We do have some people in the chat, so let's get them saying hello to you. Miss Wolff, can you go ahead and introduce yourself to my audience? Let us know who you are, where you're from, what you do, and maybe tell us a little bit about that book you just released.
Yeah, absolutely. So by day, I go by Lucy Parfit. You did pronounce it properly. Thank you. And I am a digital marketer for a company that owns pubs and restaurants. And then by any other time, so in the evenings or at the weekend, I go by Alex Wolff, who writes fantasy novels. And like Adrian said, I just released ELAN, so that's my first debut novel. And yeah, you can find me mainly on Instagram. That's where I like to lurk about and meet other writers. I go on Goodreads as well because I read a lot of books, so you can chat me up there. Facebook, and I also have my own website, and I believe all those links are down below. So yeah.
See, you're a natural. That was perfect. All right. So let's see here. Let's dive right into the interview and not waste any time today because time is precious and limited. Here we go. Honestly, I just like to show off. It's just fun. These title cards are completely unnecessary.
No, I love them.
So let's dive right in. You use a pen name. You mentioned it. So I find names to be very important, and I'm fascinated by their backstories. Why did you choose to use a pen name in the first place, and how did you choose Alex Wolf?
So names are super important to me too. I guess the reason why I chose to go for like a pen name was because writing is a passion project more than like a career. And in my mind, I wanted to give its own identity. I wanted it to be a separate thing from my day job. I like to do multiple things and I like to organize things. I'm a super organized person. Again, that fits in my day job very well. It made sense, especially in the fantasy genre, I thought it'd be a cool idea to make myself part of that fantasy. And also I got inspiration from Darren Shan, who is an author for, I believe, young adult fantasy. He wrote books years ago, like when I was a teenager, and he put himself in his own books. And I just love that idea. I believe the same with the Bronte sisters, where they, had pen names that sounded quite masculine or androgynous. And that's why I went for the name Alex, because I feel like it was androgynous. It was also a character. I used to call myself, when you played like games as a kid, I always used to be like, my name's going to be Alex. I have no idea why. I just like the name. So I feel like it was fun to like make that a thing in my adult life as well. And Wolf came from like, also felt quite fantasy. And then to me, it like symbolized this kind of adventurous freedom, like
nice.
Yeah. So that's my whole reason behind it.
I love it. I'm into it. ELAN, Son of Song, was released about 2.5 weeks ago at the time of recording. So how did your book release turn out compared to your plans for it? Wow, I can't read today. Go ahead.
It's fine. It went really well. Like, this was the first, as I said, like a debut novel. This was my first like proper release where I'd put months of work into it before, like the Jilted one and books that I've done before. I'd never really put any kind of back work into it. Whereas this, I worked on the marketing, the social media aspect of it. And I just, it went so well. And I honestly, like, it's addictive. Like, now I'm already wanting to do my next one. Like, I want to launch it now and be like, have that high again and have that same like fun thing. Also, unlike Jilted, this was like new territory for me, because Jilted, as I said, we'll talk about, is like a personal thing. So a lot of family and friends were like, aware of it, whereas this was a completely new audience that I was tapping into. So I kind of gave myself low expectations for it, which then worked out well for me, because then it ended up being quite good. Also, coincidentally, it launched on a day of one of my beta's birthdays, and that was just like a really good omen for me. I was like, yes, this is meant to be, like, this
good
is
sign.
so cool. Yeah. So it was great.
How did it go with the betas and critique partners on this book, and how much did they affect the actual outcome?
So again, it was my first time doing it, so I was super nervous, and like, I've never had feedback from my writing before, so I had no idea what to expect. And honestly, it was so rewarding. Like, they were so kind and constructive, and it was so useful. And I think mainly like just little bits where they kind of informed like the world building or whatever, where, I don't know about this, or they want more of this. And also they had really like big ideas of what I want, they want me to do next. So that kind of geared me up for the next one as well. So it was really cool in that respect. I really liked that.
I'm always, fascinated by the effect that the betas and critique partners have on the book. Because, for example, I had just written maybe about 6 chapters or so of my current project when I let a close friend read a few chapters, and in the second chapter, there's a character, one of my main characters, I'm sort of setting the stage for him and what's going to be going on with him. So I have him sitting at a bar, and I wanted him talking to somebody that he was familiar with. I didn't want it just to be like somebody sitting next to him or a random bartender. I wanted there to be a relationship there. So I made the bartender his sister, and I had no plans to go further with that or to do anything in particular with the sister or anything like that. I just needed a connection for my character there. And when my beta read it and I asked him who his favorite character was, he chose the sister, the bartender. And I was like, really? Why? She has like 3 lines and like she's like barely in it. And he's like, she got her brother a drink without him asking for it. And then that made her my favorite character. And I was like, an entire backstory for that character just exploded in my brain in that moment. And now she's a main character in book 2. She's got one of the craziest arcs, and like, anyway, it's funny how that happens. Yeah.
I had the same thing actually with I think it was the mother in Elan, where so many people loved her, and I was like, she's just a side character. I don't know why people like, I'm so in love with my main character. I had no idea, and no plans. Already my beaters are like demanding a novella for this mother, and I'm like, okay.
And now, isn't that crazy how like a character can just come to life in the mind of a reader? So much so that even the author didn't intend it, but it just it's all there. That's crazy. So what about the process of writing this book stood out to you, made it special to you as the writer?
Well, as I've already kind of mentioned, just so much of it, the fact that it's like my first for everything. I started writing Elan back in 2018, would you believe it? And my life was in a completely different place as most people's, I reckon. But I was engaged, I had different friends, and I was writing for a mindset of kind of fitting it in before I got married and had kids. So I was kind of just messing about a little bit. And I obviously took a break, I think at the end of 2018, and I didn't touch it again until January 2020. So the first part of the book, if my beaters know this, it's very different to the second part. And I feel I really like that because it kind of fed into my real life narrative, like how it's like light and happy. And then part 2 is just dark.
Yeah.
And even in my acknowledgements, I like talk about how Elan's really opened the metaphorical door for like me in so many ways because of that. And yeah, that's why Elan for me will always be like a special book.
It just from the cover alone, you can tell that there's a lot of heart in that book. I haven't read it yet, and I can tell by that cover and the way that you talk about it. Like, I can't wait to read it. And apparently in our chat, there's people with it on their to be read pile. So, and it looks like Victoria Wren here has read it and loves it. So,
yay! I love Victoria.
What was the most challenging part of publishing this book, creating and publishing it?
Well, apart from everything else that was going on, I feel like writing, I've learned, makes you so vulnerable as a person. You're bearing your soul, you're sharing things that you don't intend to share. It just comes out and you're expressing yourself. And I feel like it really takes courage to put it out there. And that's why I have a huge respect for authors and artists and everyone who expresses themselves, because it takes a huge courage to face your demons and say, I'm going to put it out there.
Yeah.
And I joke that I'm my worst critic. Like, before anyone else read Elan, I tore it to shreds. And I hate, like, there was a moment where I really hated it. I really doubted it. And then that's why the beta reading process was really important for me, because it really gave me the encouragement that people like it, and to accept it for what it was as well. That, you know, it's my first book. It's not going to be perfect, but at the same time, it's special because of that. And this is just something for me going forward that I'm going to be really aware of as well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I talk about that all the time. I'm working on my debut as well, and it's this crazy feeling where, you know, from every author that's ever existed, that your first book is going to be your worst. You just always get better as a writer, even if your first book is great, and even if it is, it's still going to be your worst one. You're going to get better and better, and there's just something so bittersweet about that, you know, knowing that you're going to get better, but also knowing that, like, your first book is always going to be a little imperfect. And you know, I was talking to Mark Piggott, and he re-released his previous works and got a chance to re-edit them later on. That's always the little like nugget of hope at the end of an indie author, a self-published author, that like, you know what, I can always like republish it later and fix it up and make it better.
Yeah, I did that with Vatican actually. I called it a refresh. Yeah, because I wrote that like 3 years ago, and I would obviously always recommend Elan over that one.
Right.
But it's kind of, that's why I made it free actually, by the way, as well. So I think
Right
apart
on.
from Amazon, it's free on my website and everywhere else because it's not edited, and it's just pure fun, really, and almost like a feel for the world, whereas Elan's like my serious one, you know.
So you keep referring to Elan as your first book, but you, as you point out, you have a book out called Vatican. Tell me about Vatican. What's it about? Does it connect to Elan at all, or was it just a standalone thing?
So they're both set in the same place. So
Okay.
the world called Luke Parr, which is made from my real name, Lucy Parfit, Luke Parr, and that's why I made it a saga, because it's not about, you know, a series of a journey or a character. I wanted the kind of freedom that a story wasn't tied to the next book or the next after that, or one character as well. I wanted to really play around with the world and explore it as I wanted to, with the freedom. And the only similarity is the world itself. Apart from that, there's no really other kind of structure there. It's me exploring my fantasy world as a basis of it. I wanted a reader as well to be able to find any book in that series, you know, as I make more and more and more, and be able to read it without having to read the others, so that they can just pick up one, read that, and go, oh, okay, I like that, and read the others. So that was the kind of idea behind it.
That's a great idea. So almost like an anthology series, but it's all set in the same world. And so the rules are kind of established and everything, but it's a new character, new adventure every time.
Yeah,
I
totally.
like that. That's
Yeah.
cool. I like
And
that a lot.
I'm like almost, I don't know if to kind of say I was like a commitment phobe at the beginning and was like, I don't want to commit to anything. So I just want to be able to jump here next time or jump here, which is what I've done. Like, I'm just going to jump all over the place whenever I want.
Yeah. Yeah, the world I've created in mine is big enough and has enough history that
Exactly.
you know, I'm playing with short stories like way in the past and like in other parts of the world and everything. So yeah, cool, very cool. So let's talk about Jilted, which is objectively a very personal piece in your growing collection of books. So do you plan on writing more books like this one? Will you continue to distinguish them from your fantasy books by using the name Lucy Parfit versus Alex Wolff? What's your plan there?
So I have none planned for that kind of genre. I hope that my life turns boring again so that I can focus on my fantasy, because that's what I want. But
a simple kind of life.
Yeah, exactly. Just a life where I can just jump in my head and not have to worry about the outside world. Elan was like opening the door for the fantasy writing, whereas Jilted was almost like the healing process before that. So that's why that was kind of came out before Elan. And if I do happen to write any more nonfiction, it will be under my name, Lucy Parfit, because I feel like, as I've explained with the reasoning behind Alex Wolff, that's the fantasy genre, that's where it's going to stay, and that's how I organize it. So
I like it. I like it. Two personas.
Yeah.
Very nice. What was it about the experience last year? Like obviously a lot went on, but what was it that made you want to write the book Jilted? What made that necessary to write it?
Yeah, so a lot happened in a short space of time, even before COVID, and I almost had this huge urge to write out to process it, in order to process it, because so many emotions and feelings and other people's like involvement became part of it, that I was then trying to understand what actually happened and understand myself, my feelings about it, and everything in between. So I do journal on like a daily basis as like a mental health reflective thing, but this whole experience felt different in that it was, you know, journaling, I'm talking to myself, whereas I felt like for this experience I wanted to talk to other people about it in a way that was clear and organized and purely from my point of view, which is what I state very clearly in the book. it was such a unique experience as well, because being jilted 3 days before my wedding, and then COVID, and then going through all the normal garbage that you go through with a breakup, I just felt like it was such a unique experience. I wanted to just document it and have something to go back to and say, this, I did this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And man, 3 days before the wedding, like at that point, everything's paid for, everything's ready to go.
Yeah,
Good
a lot of money went
grief.
out of that. Yeah.
Like I'm stressing out for you right now. That's bananas.
Yeah.
So what are some of the moments from 2020 that really stuck out to you then, other than being jilted? What else was the big moments that you might touch on in the book if people want to read it?
Sure. So I think I talk about in the book about how, for me, words started to have a different meaning. So like lockdown, no one mentioned lockdown before COVID, and then suddenly it had this whole new meaning. And the same for isolation. Isolation or loneliness was something that you kind of had a feeling for every now and then, or suffered from, whereas this was a time where a lot of people experienced it at once.
Most people, yeah.
Exactly. And I ended up being in isolation for 12 weeks, which is like the longest time I've ever been on my own, and first time I was living on my own as well. So I feel like for me, that word isolation, I really had a lot of like work behind it, because I really wanted to see what I felt behind that word, because that changed, that shifted majorly during that time. And also a lot of shit happened. And I feel like we had the power and control to deal with it in a way that helped each other. And I feel like I saw that a lot, that you would never see before COVID. We then, for people's health and for people's sanity, we had to work together. And that was something that I'd never experienced before. And I felt like it was just so meaningful to me. And, at the same time experiencing being, jilted and whatever, that was just a very important time for me to feel that, feel connected to other people while being isolated. It changed. It took all of me to change my life for the better as well. And the fact that I was able to do that during a personal disaster and a world disaster, I feel like invincible now. Because I've been able to do that. So
going through it all just kind of hardens you and forces you to grow. I mentioned it to you in the outline that I sent you, this idea that like things like when the George Floyd murder went down, and all the protests that happened after that, and the Black Lives Matter movement and everything going on in America with that stuff, like on the one hand, you don't want, these horrible things to happen, and on the other hand, you're like, well, let's do something about it. Like, if people are finally getting together and they're finally raising up to handle this stuff, like, all right, like, it's about time. Let's actually do something about it this time. It's funny how like everybody kind of comes together by fighting each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of bananas.
Well, that's what I mean by how it was such a shared experience. No matter what people were going through, it felt so shared, even though we're all isolated, and that was just a fascinating experience for me. Really cool.
Yeah, isolated and yet, through the magic of the internet, sort of united with everybody at the same time.
Yeah.
Being able to know that everybody's going through this thing that you're going through, and yet everybody's kind of going through it on their own. It was such a bizarre time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. Let's cheer things up. So you and I have some similarities in our works. In my book series, the main setting for book one is the Spark, which is this like moon-sized space station that orbits a moonless ringed planet, and the inhabitants of the Spark named that planet Gaia. The actual inhabitants of the planet call it by another name, so it's arguable what the planet's true name is. But I noticed Gaia as one of the lands on a map on your website. So I've found similarities to my novel and other works by other indie authors as well, and I've had to develop a bit of a thick skin in dealing with it, and because it causes me to like anxiety ridden, like make impulsive decisions about it, and it makes me want to change things, and then I have to kind of fight that urge and all that. So does this sort of thing bother you as well as a writer? Do you have triggers and pet peeves for things that you see in other books that are too similar to your own, and then you got to change them, or how do you deal with it?
So first of all, Yours sounds really awesome, and I can't wait to read it and learn more about it.
I'll
And
send you some
also,
sample chapters.
please do. Oh my God, I'd love that.
You got it.
And it used to bother me. It doesn't anymore. And I'll tell you why. I remember very clearly I think it was a film on Netflix called Bright, which I don't think went down very well.
No, I saw that one. It wasn't great.
Exactly. It had Will Smith in. It was a fantasy film. And I just remember that I think it was like the first film that I'd seen where a very interspecies thing was happening. And as you know from my books, it had interspecies in it. And I remember getting so riled up being like, I can't believe this has happened. Like it was rubbish. And I was thinking people are just going to, you know, see that in my book and think, oh, it's not going to be as good. You know, it was almost like labeling it rubbish because of that film or whatever. I just remember thinking my stuff's so much better. Like I had this fear that people would, you know, have that stereotype or whatever. But it was such a learning experience of kind of swallowing it down and being like, okay. And I remember this is just a little tidbit of like my experience, but I trained in child development and teaching at university. And from what I've learned is that we as humans don't have anything original. We learn by sharing and watching and copying and doing everything, being a community, connecting with people. So once I kind of reminded myself of that, I was like, okay, so it's not like I'm not doomed. You know, there's going to be similarities wherever you go. You're going to be able to connect some dots wherever you go or whatever you do. And it helped me understand that there's freedom of interpretation there, that you can interpret things differently and that people are going to see that and not worry about being original anymore. You know, you can't be original really. I actually find with ELAN as well, I found myself wanting people to actually find the hidden links. So one of my favorite bands is Nightwish, and I make a lot of reference to them in my books with songs. And one of my beaters happened to find them, and I was actually like so thrilled that she saw that. I remember thinking, so this is the thing, this is the fun bit actually. It's not being like, oh, well, I didn't copy them. I've just been inspired by them and I've interpreted them in a fantasy world. And being able to connect with the reader on that level was just really fun. So that's where I kind of learned to kind of turn my spin on it. I'd say I do have a pet peeve though.
Okay.
I think my only one I'm very particular about is vampires. And that's because obviously there's been a lot of vampire stuff going on in popular culture. Like they've become a popular culture thing, whereas back when I was a teen, it was like this goth, like secret and, you know, underground thing. And I remember being like, you know, once it all became popular, I was like, oh, I liked them before they were popular, you know?
Yeah, I do know.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I feel like now I'm kind of one of those people saying, oh, I like it back when they were, you know, real vampires. And I guess that's my only real pet peeve. But on the point of even just the fantasy genre in general, if you think about it, that's a challenge, and it's becoming a challenge in itself because it's becoming popular. And, you know, back when Tolkien was Tolkien, you know, before Tolkien was Tolkien, fantasy was, you know, not that much known, whereas now it's like a major thing. And being out of the box, well, now it's kind of in its own box.
Yeah. Well, see, what's funny about that is that you have, especially in fantasy, a long running tradition of these characters and these worlds and these, you know, the different magic types and all that kind of stuff. And as you point out, before Tolkien, fantasy was not as huge a thing, but even Tolkien having made it his own, he was still drawing from things that came before. He didn't make up elves. He didn't invent dwarves. He came up with his spin on these things. And so and that's where I'm coming from too, because like, for example, in the movie that you pointed out, Bright, I didn't like it at all, and I wanted to like it when I saw the trailer before it came out. I really wanted to like it because I was like, it's a modern day, but it's a fantasy. There's magic, but there's cops. This sounds great, and it was terrible. And then Pixar puts out Onward. I don't know if you've seen it,
Yeah,
but it's essentially the same idea,
it is. Yeah.
and they nail it. It's incredible. It's a great movie. So that kind of shows you that, like, it's not about the concept, and if you choose that concept, you're doomed to fail. You can make a concept great. You just have to write that great story. You know what I'm saying? So, like, one of the things that really bugged me when writing my first draft was, I was finishing up. I was actually almost done. I had already written the ending anyway. Like, I was filling in little gaps and stuff like that. And another author on YouTube puts out her first book, and it becomes this like big talking point, the way that she ends her book. There's this big thing that she does at the end of her book, and of course it's the big thing that I have planned for the end of my book. And I'm like, oh, and everybody's just trashing on it in her book, and how she dropped the ball and it whatever. And I'm like, oh no, I have to like rewrite my entire book now because the ending doesn't work. And I was really going through something here because she failed at her attempt at it, and I'm not going to change. I had to like have a conversation with myself. It's like, no, I can make it better, but I'm not going to change it. The ending is the ending, and I'm just because somebody else did something similar, and like, I'm going to do it better. It's going to be better. like you said, you're not writing anything original.
Compare. Do not compare.
Exactly.
That's the danger here.
But that's the anxiety of being a writer, right? That like you see these other stories, and you're like, especially knowing that there is really like nothing new under the sun. You're just putting your spin on things,
Once you give up that control and say, look, it's not going to be original, but it's going to be me, and I'm only me. You've got to kind of
because
own
it's
that.
you, it's original.
Exactly. It's that. Yeah, it's a paradox, but yeah.
I love it. Let's see here. In a similar vein to the previous question, ELAN, Son of Song, and Vatican feature fae, pixies, vampires, as you pointed out, and humans. These are, staples of the fantasy genre. I'm using some of these and other creatures in my own series. So with so many writers tackling these same fantasy creatures, did you, and we've already talked about this a little bit, but did you stress out about, that standing out among them? We talked about it being your own version and being unique, but you want it to stand out. How do you feel about all that? Like reusing these tropes?
Yeah. So I definitely felt the same as you at some point, but I think I kind of stuck with it and kind of had a very clear idea in my head, kind of almost stubborn, like I said, and made it my own. I was like, look, people have different interpretations of vampires. Fae's now a big thing, a big genre in the, especially young adult fantasy. There's a lot of fairy stories out there. And I just had to say, okay, well, what's a fairy to me? And write that. And as long as I was comfortable with how I'd said how I see them, and people connected on that and like it, then that's fine for me. It's very cool. Again, like I mentioned, I think there's a danger of comparison here where you just don't worry too much what others are doing, and otherwise you're losing the point of writing. I write for myself. I write because of what I want to express from my head. What I've seen, I've taken in, and I'm reinterpreting it how I want to. So once I feel that kind of assurance, I just go for it, and and kind of make it very clear before I even write a story. I kind of write all the basics of what I see as a species, how I see that species, how they behave in the world, and how I interpret them, and then I chuck them in my book.
Almost like a little story Bible for each fantasy type.
I keep like a physical folder of like categories. Because you saw my map, I have different like locations, and depending on that location, how they behave in that location, and all that kind of stuff. I keep like a whole world building folder.
Nice. I have like a board, not a physical, but it's a digital board, but it's a board that you can like pin things up and like concepts and pictures and stuff. Millinote, it's called. It's free. They have a free version and they have a pay version. So if you ever want that, like you can have like all your details on one spot, and you can click on stuff to go into subfolders. It's very helpful with stuff like that. Now you asked me to focus on your writing rather than your art in this interview, and I can't say that I blame you with a book having just come out, but I hope you won't mind one question on the subject. You mentioned in your frequently asked questions on your website that during your art courses in college, you would illustrate your characters and then write their backstories. So do you still create characters in this way? And do you have any plans of releasing an art book of your character portraits or anything like that?
So it's no problem. We can talk about it. And as so far, I have literally, I think a few weeks ago, just done an art zine, which features all of the pictures that I've done of like my characters in. I did a Comic-Con like 2 weeks ago where I sold my book ELAN, and then I sold this alongside it where I was both, my artist side and my author side. So
Nice.
yeah. And I've been obviously illustrating for a lot longer than I've been writing. And so I feel like I'm almost just catching up with my writing, if that makes sense. So I've drawn my characters for years and I've got them kind of almost established now in this book and whatever. And then with the art zine, and then I'm also adding that to my Etsy store as well, by the way. And then, yeah, it was during the process of drawing them where I kind of developed the backstories in my head. And that's where the writing's now evolved. But going forward, I feel like once I catch up with my writing, I'm not sure where I'm going to go because I'm so involved with my writing at the moment. I can't, I mean, I'm such a visual person though. So I do think I probably will sketch like art, like the character art or whatever, but I don't know if I will invest so much time in the character art going. I don't know,
Sure.
We'll see, because they also, it's also like great marketing and whatever, and nice little visual things to go with the book. But yeah, I just feel like in terms of like time investment, alongside my day job, I'm just so much more invested in my writing at the moment. So
I just find it so I don't know, what's the word? It's complementary to each other because you have so many authors who have to work with a designer or an artist of some kind to come up with their covers and the character, portraits and all this stuff. And there's always a little, no matter how close the artist gets it, there's always going to be a little bit of disconnect between what the author saw and what the artist interpreted.
Yeah.
Being the author and the artist simultaneously is pretty special. You get to actually show us exactly what it is that you see in your head as you see it. You know what I mean? So I just find that to be very special. So do what you will, but I like it. I think it's
Thank
cool.
you.
Now, you mentioned earlier you do work a day job and you self-publish your books at a pace that works for you.
Yeah.
Maintaining your writing career as a passion project rather than a job. So do you plan on ever going full-time author in the future? You expressed a little, you're jonesing for that high again of releasing a book. So how do you see this evolving in the future? You're going to keep working? You're going to do both? Focus on author? What do you do?
So the short answer is no. But that is purely personal choice. And it's come from my experience that I was an illustrator in a previous job. And I can tell you it ruined the whole fun for me. And possibly why I moved on to writing, because the kind of illustration, working for someone and kind of funneling that creativity for someone's, for that audience, it was just very, I don't know, difficult for me. And I write to escape. Like I said, like if my life is boring enough, I like to write my fantasy. So if writing was my life, I feel like I almost will try and find some other escape and move on. I'm just that type of person. And I don't know what it was like in America, but in the UK, I was furloughed last year and this year. So I had a great opportunity to kind of see what I do, where I got paid part of my salary to do nothing. And and during that time I didn't write anything. So I remember thinking this is a great opportunity to like write every day and pretend I'm a like full-time author and all that stuff. It just didn't happen. And may have been the circumstances, all that was going on, but I feel like that was an opportunity and I couldn't do it. I can't see myself doing it full time. I also love my day job. I'm such a, as you can see from my art, writing, I'm such a varied person. I just do a bunch of things and I just seem to jump from one to the other. And that's why yeah, I love playing around with loads of things, and I feel like to take that away and just focus on one thing will feel restricting for me.
Well, I noticed that the hair color changes. I see the
Yeah.
tattoos. I get the tats too, so I get it. But I see that. I see that, and you probably like to keep things fresh, keep things kind of moving and changing as much as possible. I like it. We are going to switch gears here and go into our topic for a little bit. It's going to kind of come out of one of the questions in the chat. So let me throw this up.
Oh gosh.
What do you mean, oh gosh? We're gonna have a great time. It's gonna be great. We're having fun.
Thanks.
So we're gonna kick it off out of this this question that Barrett throws up because it's kind of perfect here. Here we go. Best part of world building for you as a writer. We're both fantasy writers, so where does the joy that you find in world building? Where does that come from?
Well, so I think just because naturally I'm a nerd and I just love getting into the detail of everything to the point where I just want to know everything about that one topic. And also I've also recently discovered that I'm a huge history fan, right? And I've discovered that writing my own history for even my fantasy world, I'm absolutely loving, because it's like time I'm also now playing with. So that's another thing that I've developed, and I feel like, yeah, there's just so much there that you can uncover and learn every time that you, and again, writing another book, like every time you write a book, I'm going to be learning something new, and that's really exciting. So it's about like learning, basically.
Yeah, the amount of research that goes into writing a new book is incredible, and it makes you smarter, it makes you a better writer, but it's not something that you think about when you decide to become a writer or that you want to write a book, how much you're going to learn about a particular topic. You know, with world building, with fantasy, you have not only the world to establish, not only the magic system, if there is one to establish, but the different races and everything. What was most challenging for creating your fantasy world? Like, what's the part that maybe you butted heads with a little bit?
I think it was the magic. I really struggled to I have a very soft system in my books because I feel like I don't want to commit to one type of system. I want to be able for it to feel natural and evolve in the person rather than it being like a strict thing. Probably with most of my stuff, which is why I don't really have a very like strict rules on anything apart from I guess my species and my definition of the species. But apart from that, like, yeah, magic was really tough for me because it's such a, I don't know, it's such a vague thing, isn't it? And there's such a huge variety you could go there.
And there's such a line too, because if it's too vague, like people don't buy it. If it's too specific, then it becomes like exposition heavy and to explain, and it just like the mysticism kind of goes away. So you have to kind of skate that line.
It was balancing it. I
ran into the same thing with mine too, because you know, in my world it's a sci-fi fantasy world, so you have all the sci-fi stuff, all the technology and all that kind of stuff, but then you'll have a character who's just kind of who stands outside of that and has, you know, these other abilities that are just kind of outside of the sci-fi thing and brings you into the fantasy world of it. And coming up with a vague enough system that creates this mysticism about the magic, but also knowing how it works, because you have to actually like make it make sense. It was very challenging for me as well. Yeah. And as I'm editing my first draft, I'm trying to fix it as well. I'm trying to like fix the whole magic like element a little bit. Cool. When I dive into the second book, we're going to explore it more deeply. It's going to be much more heavy on the fantasy in that one.
That's exactly what I've done. So my next one is really like, yeah, it's really exploring that magical element for this one. This one character has more of a know-how of magic compared to Elan. So I feel like, yeah, it's really pushed me for that boundary, which is really cool.
So we're getting some praise for your artwork in the chat. So the topic is going to kind of permeate. It already has permeated into the interview, and it'll kind of bleed over into the chat questions. So we're just going to go ahead and go into that as well. Everybody just take a dance break.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see here. The first question from the chat was from the lovely Victoria. What would you do differently for your next book release? Are your characters based on anyone you know? So 2 questions in one.
Ooh. Okay, what do you... Ooh, that's a good question. Because the release went well, I don't feel like I'll do anything differently. Oh, actually, although arcs is definitely something I will work on better, because ELAN was my first book and I felt like I just gave an arc to everyone and I just like gave it away. And I remember it, and then I got like, it wasn't that bad, but I got a couple of people where they didn't really like it, and it caused huge anxiety before the release. And then the release happened, and then it was a lot better. But I remember thinking like that was just unnecessary stress that I didn't need, and I didn't need to have done that, and I didn't need to kind of seek validation before the release. So I feel like going forward, I will still do arcs, but I think I'll just be a bit more selective.
Sure.
Yeah. And then, are your characters based on anyone you know? This was an interesting question, because I feel like I go very like psychological with myself, because when I write stuff, I feel like, you know, is this based on someone I know, or is this just like part of myself? Especially like ELAN himself, like, is it me or is it someone that I know? I talk about I have an inspiration section at the back of the book about how ELAN was inspired, and I remember a lot of it is dreams. So, but they say that you don't dream like, you know, random. Well, that you always have dreams based off someone you've seen in real life. Okay. So, in that way, they're probably based off people, but I don't know. I think it's already
filtered through dreams. Yeah.
Yeah, like I've already confused myself by having a dream of something that I don't know where that's from. It's subconscious. So, yeah, but not that I know of. Characters are based. Yeah, not that I know of. But
see, for me, I actively try not to put an actual person like it that I know in the book, but I do draw from people I know. You draw from aspects of their personality or their appearance or whatever it might be to form a new character. Sometimes I'll take parts of people and put them together and make a new person, you know?
Yeah, that's cool.
On the subject of vampires, who are your favorite fictional vampires?
Well, so I don't know if I mentioned Anne Rice already, but Anne Rice, who wrote the Vampire Chronicles, is a huge inspiration for me. And her characters mainly. So there's Lestat de Lioncourt, there's Armand, who's like this Russian vampire who's so cool, and then Marius as well. I think those are the main ones that I can think of. And like Dracula was interesting because I have Dracula in my book, but I wouldn't say he's based off the actual real Dracula. I have my own interpretation of him because I feel like I almost read that book and I was a bit like, oh, this is what vampires are based off? And I remember being like, okay, well, I'm going to make it better. You know?
There's a lot, you know, that book it's a very interesting read because there's some wild like inconsistencies in the vampires like powers and all that kind of stuff. And but what it did though was it created a baseline for vampires that people then pick from. Like, okay, I like this, let's get rid of all that. This is a vampire. And
I feel like I've done exactly the same, but it is definitely, obviously, I have to commemorate that baseline.
Yeah. Well, you know, we talked earlier about like these character types and fantasy creatures that have a long running history and trying to make them your own. You know, that's how you end up with something like Twilight, which has a very unique take on vampires, one that has become kind of a cliched, you know, trope and whatnot. But But when she first put that out, there wasn't any other vampires that were remotely like that. So that, you know, it's interesting how like she got so far away from what makes a vampire, but it's still, those are her vampires. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And like, even though I mentioned that as a pet peeve, and she's a good example of why I have that pet peeve, but I do have to respect her for going out of the box.
Yeah. She took a swing, man. And, you know, a couple millions of dollars later, it paid off.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Barrett Laurie's here with some questions. What is the best part of world building for you as a writer? We covered that already. What's the next Barrett Laurie one? What genre of story would you never write? He likes asking this. I think he wants to make us like uncomfortable.
No, that's fine. I had to really think about this one. I think before 2019, I would have said nonfiction because that's like when I prominently wrote fantasy, and that the reason why I wrote was for fantasy and exploring that. But I guess now it would be like crime detective novels, because I think that's probably the only genre I don't read. So I feel like I would be so far from that genre, I wouldn't be able to write it at all.
One of the things I've been trying to do lately is to read books in genres that I don't write or normally read. To, you know, it makes you a better writer to like see this wildly different kind of genre. And so like, while my book is like a murder mystery set in a sci-fi fantasy world, I picked up like a Caribbean islander like teen romance novel the other day. And I'm like, okay, this is a whole different flavor. What is your writing kryptonite? The thing that stops you from writing?
I think, like we mentioned, the danger of comparison. And you know, sometimes I can read a really good novel and be like, now I'm just pumped to write and I want to, you know, kind of be along that crew and whatever. But sometimes I can also read a book and think, wow, that's just way too good. I don't think I could ever be that good. and almost put me off writing, because I could be like, oh, wow, I'm such a novice. You know, it's not my job, blah, blah, blah. You know, all these doubts start then jumping in my head, and it stops me writing. As well as, because I write in my personal time, if there's a lot of stuff going on in my personal life, that obviously affects my writing. So that probably is like another kryptonite thing, is that, you know, if a lot is going on, it unfortunately writing has to take the back burner a bit. So yeah.
Richard is throwing out the question of gardener or architect. Are you familiar with these two types here? So there's the plotter and the pantser. I'm sure you're gardener. Architect is similar. It's the idea of the architect is very much the plotter, the one that, you know, has structured everything, has plans for everything, knows exactly what he needs. Cool. And then the gardener has a plan, has an outline and all that kind of stuff, but still allows for sort of creativity to take over. I always like to explain it as you can plant a tomato seed and know that you're going to get a tomato vine, but depending on how much nutrients you give it, how much sunlight, how much water, it'll be a bigger one, a smaller one, sweeter, more tart. It'll change. The end result will surprise you in the end based on what you put into it. So that's kind of the difference between architect and gardener in the terms of writing. So where are you in that? So
I would probably say gardener then, because even though I outline and I plot to death, but then I never end up kind of almost ending where I'd plotted. You know, it's almost, I explain it as I like to have a really clear outline, even though I might not end up there. I like to, it almost just gives me the confidence to write by just having that there and have a plan in place, whether it's going to go ahead or not. It's just having that plan in place. That's what helps me write. But yeah, I would say that, you know, from my experience with writing the last few books, I never end up in the same place that I planned, which is fine. It's cool.
You plan, but you allow when you're writing for things to happen, so to speak.
Totally.
Yeah, same.
And I'm good with that. I love that.
Me too.
What I love about writing.
So what's the best part of the publishing process for you? Or what
there's so many. Yeah. So as I said, the beta process was amazing. And then I think also for me, the thing I look forward to every time going forward as well will be the cover and getting the cover designed, because as I said, I'm such a visual person, and being an illustrator and stuff, I I feel like it's almost gives me that fuel to keep going in the publishing process. That's why I like to do the cover just before I get into editing, so that it kind of gives me that encouragement to go through the editing, because the editing is what I find really hard. But having that visual representation there almost gives me that push to do it. So yeah, definitely the cover as well. Love that. So fun. I can't hear you.
Sorry, that was me. I mic'd myself while you were talking and then forgot to unmute myself. What tip would you give a newbie unpublished writer?
So it sounds really simple, but from my experience, it's just to write. It sounds stupid, but
it's good advice. Just get it done. Yeah.
Well, just write, and you can go through the beta process. You can do the bits afterwards to whether you want to publish, but it's actually getting the groundwork. It's getting that first draft. The first draft is almost the hardest bit. I like to explain it as, the first draft isn't even perfect. It's, for me, it's it's really weird metaphor, but I like to imagine it like a sculpture, so that the first draft is the clay, and then the editing is the sculpting and the refining, and all the stuff that follows afterwards is making it a thing. But the first draft is literally getting the clay in the first place. Once you get that hard bit out of the way, it's just off you go, basically.
That's a great way to look at it. That's a great way to look at it. I
tell myself that all the time.
I always remind myself of the two quotes, one from Terry Pratchett and one from Neil Gaiman. Terry Pratchett says that the first draft is you telling yourself the story.
Yes.
And then Neil Gaiman says the second draft is making it look like you knew what you were doing all along.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Best quotes. Love that.
Colin Clark, my good man, asks, do you favor any particular writing tense? Past tense, present tense, future tense?
I struggle with tenses, but I reckon past, because again, because of, I think it may be because of the outline thing, but I feel like because I already have the story in my head, it makes more sense for me to tell it in past tense, because I already know what's going to happen. If I write it in present tense, I always slip into past tense because of that, I think. So that's what I've learned. So I feel like, past tense for me.
Apparently, when we were talking about what genres you wouldn't write, Richard was just having a blast in the chat here.
I'd totally write erotica. I love erotica. I'm sorry. Yeah, totally.
I have sex scenes in my novel as well. I mean,
it's my fun. Yeah,
you gotta do the do.
In my first, obviously, this Elan is a young adult, so that's not got any in it, but the next one I'm writing is definitely more adult. So, yeah.
Here's another good one from Colin. You said no to crime, but how about crime fae as part of your own fictional world? I'm thinking Carnival Row. You cover some darker themes in your work. Wouldn't this be a good fit? Colin's just throwing good ideas your way.
Yeah, and that's totally a good example as well, because I really liked Carnival Row, and that was one good example of the bright example where I was actually felt a bit more assured that I was on the right track with the fae stuff. I still just feel a little bit uncomfortable with the crime thing, because I've discovered in my world building I'm not very people aren't bad people are bad, but there's a reason they're bad, and I don't know, crime just seems to be a strange concept in my world at the moment, so I do need to work on that a bit more.
It is more of a straight up fantasy, your book, so crime in general. If you continue to dabble in that genre, I see how the whole crime genre wouldn't be a part of it. I actually tried to do the exact opposite. I was like, okay, it's a sci-fi fantasy world, the main plot is a murder mystery. We're gonna hunt a serial killer. So I'm blending genres. So this brings us to the end of our show. I am going to give you a moment here to let the people at home know anything else you wanted to cover today that maybe we didn't get a chance to. I remember you wanted to mention World Anvil. We didn't get to it.
Oh yeah.
We still have the podcast, but in the meantime, if you wanted to tell folks where they can find you or anything that you wanted to plug at this time, I'll give you the floor.
Sure. Well, if you haven't already, please check out ELAN, and it's on Amazon and most online retailers. If not, also head over to my website. It's got everything on there, including the characters that I've mentioned, the books that also made me a writer as well, and stuff like that, family trees, character portraits, all that good stuff. Otherwise, I have a bunch more books coming, so be sure to follow me on Instagram or Goodreads, and yeah, keep in touch.
All right. Very, very nice. Everybody keep in mind, her links are down below in the description. And if you would like to hear more from Miss Alex Wolf, she will also be on the Books by Adrian podcast. That's going to go, the video version goes live at 11 a.m. on Thursday. That's this coming Thursday. That same day, it also goes live, the audio versions on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, among others. So if you like podcasts, go check that out. We got some fun stuff going on there. I want to get everybody ready here. All right. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for all the interaction here. Miss Wolf, stick around. We'll talk a little bit afterwards. And guys, thank you so much. We'll see you Thursday for the podcast, and we'll see everybody else back here on Sunday with Odette Bach, who is an artist who specializes in character portraits for authors like ourselves. She did a few portraits for me as well. So come back on Sunday, 4 p.m. right here. Same bat time, same bat channel. All right, y'all. Peace.
Thank you.
It sound right, boys.